I think everyone's getting hooked up and ready to present. So thank you. So thank you everyone for being here. Really, it's good evening and welcome to the 2022 executive briefing for our Ambassador Circle and our Legacy Circle. For those of you here, thank you. It's been nice to have conversations with you during the reception and during the first breakout session with some of you, and hope you got to walk around the grounds a little bit. Some things change, some things don't change here. And for those who are joining us online, thank you for being here and being supporters. For me, being surrounded by folks who care deeply about the Carter Center and have cared and known about the Carter Center longer than, admittedly, I have actually been part of it or even known about the center, it has been really enlightening for me to hear from you all what brought you here and what keeps you here. And so one of the things we want to do, I want to talk a little bit about what we had looked at. It's our 40th anniversary now. It is Saturday is President Carter's 98th birthday. It is the 25th anniversary here of the executive briefing, minus the last 2 years, which I think all of us have missed. And we're dedicating the Peace Bell Tower tomorrow. And the Peace Bell, the fact that it's been sitting in the lobby of this wonderful building and only really seen by our staff and people who would come in for meetings, it's really a remarkable piece of history and it's a remarkable story. So look forward to having the dedication tomorrow. And so although this is a time of celebration for the 40th anniversary, it's also a great opportunity to look back at what we've accomplished. I will say that the fact that we have brought guinea worm down from 3.5 million people a year in 21 countries to 15 human cases last year, which is amazing. President Carter likes to say, he wants to be around for the last guinea worm, and part of us doesn't want to get rid of the last guinea worm because we want President Carter to stick around. But we've also observed over 110 elections in almost 40 countries, and we've also eliminated the curse of river blindness in 4 countries in the Americas. And so this is, I know, it's remarkable. So that just names a few of the things that we have done since the Carter Center started. And so reminiscing about those, we're also looking forward as to what we will be doing. And we'll have more of a conversation. I'll have a conversation. Jason Carter and I will talk a bit more about that tomorrow morning, so hope you'll be able to join us. And we're going to focus on what we're doing next. So tonight we want to bring you on a trip overseas with some of our staff from overseas and give you a glimpse of what our hard work looks like there. And so we're joined, in this case, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Zambia. And I'm excited that our 3 country office leaders are here tonight to illuminate the work that's happening on the ground. And to help us do that, we have one of our locals. We have Maria Saporta moderating, and Maria is a longtime Atlanta business, civic, and urban affairs journalist with deep knowledge of our city, our region, and the state. And she is editor of her own very well-respected Saporta Report, which she started during her 11-year tenure at the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And she also spent 27 years with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So please welcome Maria and introduce our 3 panelists.
Well, welcome everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I hope that at the end of this program you will feel more enlightened and more stimulated to know that the work that you have been doing to support the center is really having some wonderful benefits around the world. We have 3 individuals here tonight who can help tell that story. Farthest to my right is Mulat Zerihun Lemu. I hope that I did that right. He's a regional senior advisor for the Carter Center's Trachoma Control Project in Amhara, Ethiopia. Trachoma, for those of you who might not know, is a bacterial eye infection that is easily spread. Repeated infections can lead to blindness if left untreated. And it also is fairly easy to treat if you have the medications. Mulat spent 27 years with Ethiopia's Ministry of Health before joining the Carter Center in 2005. Next to him is Rachel Fowler, who actually comes from South Carolina, I learned tonight, and she has spent most of her professional life working for the Carter Center. Since 2019, she has been the Carter Center's Zambia country representative, and she also worked on democracy and human rights issues all over the world before she went to Zambia and continues to do that work. But in Zambia, she's involved in supporting women's and youth organizations as they work to ensure that the voices of women and young people are heard and that they can participate in local, state, and national government. You were here, and I wrote some quick notes that before going to Zambia, you worked for the Carter Center from 1998 to 2008. You left for an 8-year stint, I guess, and then came back in 2016 to 2022. And she worked with the Carter Center Democracy, Human Rights Programs in Atlanta, and in between she worked for the U.S. Human Rights Network as well. So welcome, Rachel. And then, last but certainly not least, Guma Koney, head of the Carter Center's peace programs in Sudan. Guma is a professor and author who has served as peace advisor to Sudan's prime minister in 2020 and 2021. In his Carter Center role, he's overseeing an exciting new effort to set up and train networks of young people in Sudan to serve as independent observers of the country's democratic transition, a project that just received $10 million from the U.S. government. So my first question, yes, welcome to our distinguished panel. My first question is a way to help tell the audience more about what you do and where, and kind of some of the issues that you face to do what you do in the particular countries. And let us start with Mulat.
Thank you, Maria. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad to sit in front of you and participate in this panel. As mentioned, Ethiopia harbors the highest prevalence of trachoma in the world. And from Ethiopia, the region where I'm working, with population of 24 million, harbors the highest. And the Carter Center started supporting this program in 2001. It started in 4 districts of 1 zone, and then in 2003, it was scaled up to 4 zones and 19 districts. In 2005, His Excellency President and Ms. Rosalynn Carter has visited the site and talked to people served. He read his face how they were happy, and so also there were people who were waiting for service, and he also read their face how they were misery. And in front of those people, he promised to look for a fund and to cover the whole region with this program. Based on his promise, in 2006, we signed an agreement with the government to cover the whole region. By then, the total population was not as of now, around 12 million, and 12 zones. So we covered all, and we started working with government. So by then, the prevalence trachoma was very high. There was no any district below the cutoff point of WHO set off, and all zones had above 10 percent prevalence. I don't know, these technical words might confuse you, so I will not go to that. So starting from that time, actually at that time, this program included one killer disease, malaria, based on the request of Ministry of Health, and for 8 years, malaria and trachoma jointly were supported by the Carter Center program. So the backlog from the survey, what you call trachomatous trichiasis, which means, as Maria mentioned, this is of the poor, neglected from government side because of priorities. And there were 640,000 cases waiting for surgery. And the prevalence of trachoma, active trachoma, in the highest was 72% in children 1 to 9 years. So we started fighting this problem, starting from that prevalence. So far, I'm not going to go through. So far, we have served 700,000, over 740,000 surgeries. I mentioned 600,000, but because of incidence rates or newly increasing cases, we have served 740,000 so far, and still we are left with 130,000 cases, as based on the study we have. In the active trachoma side, we have brought down 54 districts below 5%, which means 5% means in children 1 to 9 years, the cutoff point of trachoma elimination. So we have 160 districts with the health office. So from the 160 districts, only 54 have reached cutoff point of elimination. But none of the districts, WHO has set 2 criteria for trachoma elimination. One is active trachoma, less than 5% in children 1 to 5 years. And the other is trachomatous trichiasis or eyelash scratching the eyeball, less than 0.2% in population 15 years and above. So, as I told you, the active trachoma has achieved 54 districts, or more than 5 million people stopped medication. Whereas none of the districts has achieved trachomatous trichiasis elimination. So that's what we are working, and that's where we are, and that's what the Carter Center supports. And that is where your contribution is going.
Good. Don't you feel better that he's there? So, Rachel?
Okay, it's a pleasure. People know I don't like talking into these things. Hopefully you can hear me. It's a privilege to be able to share with you about the work that we're engaged in Zambia, and it's certainly a privilege for me to be able to work again for the Carter Center and for President and Mrs. Carter's vision. And the work we do is a bit different. I'll tell you just a brief bit about Zambia. I'm not sure that everyone knows about it, but it's a landlocked country in southern Africa. They have a population of around 19 million people, but they're going through a census. And that, if I am doing my math right, but I'm not good at math, is about the population, I think, of Georgia and North Carolina combined. So that gives you some sense, I think, of the breadth of the population. It's very rural. Copper is one of the bigger exports, and very agrarian, a lot of agriculture as well. Zambia became independent in 1964 and had its first multi-party elections in 1991. And President Carter was very key, and the Carter Center was very key in that transition. And since then, have continued to be a friend.
I think he wants you to talk louder.
Okay. Has continued to be a friend and a real supporter of Zambia, and observed a number of elections over the past few decades, and most recently in 2016 and 2021. You are probably familiar with the election observation work, and one of the things that the center is trying to do through the democracy program is look for ways to ground the work in a supportive way, and to make sure that we're supporting work between Election A and Election B. Because support in democracy, strengthening democracy, takes time. One of the things about Zambia that I think is quite interesting is they are actually, one of the few countries in the past 10 or year or so that had a good democratic election. It wasn't perfect, but it was good, and people showed up to vote overwhelmingly, and young people showed up to vote. And they had very high voter turnout, people waiting in very long lines to be able to cast their ballot. And so that was a small part of what we did. The work that I've been focused on the past few years has looked at that kind of how human rights and democracy supports one another, and very particularly through what we call participatory rights, and in a very specific way in Zambia, the participation of women and youth, and really trying to increase their participation as voters, their participation as candidates, hopefully getting elected into office, their making sure their voices are heard in policy debates, making sure they're helping to ensure that good policies, when they exist, are actually implemented. And we're doing that through partnerships, because that's one of the things that's important to the center. I think it's already been demonstrated. You really need to work with local partners, and that needs to be a very meaningful and authentic act. And the center, I think, is actually quite unique in that. So we have 7 partners, some focused on women's issues, some focused on youth issues, and we work with them to help build their capacity through training and mentoring, but also give them direct support. Again, that's the support that you all are providing to do good work around women and youth rights. I think that maybe I'll stop with that. That gives you at least a little flavor.
Okay. And Guma.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I would like also to thank the audience because I'm quite sure that they are here because they have given something which has an impact on the ground there. And I would like to assure you that whatever effort you have done, whatever support you have done, it has an impact, no matter how it is small, but it's a very, very positive impact. Sudan, for some of you, may not be known, but we have now 2 Sudan because of the conflict that continued for several years, where the end result was separation of South Sudan in 2011. So now we have South Sudan, and I'm now talking about Sudan. The Sudan who remain after the separation of South Sudan is a country which is bordered with South Egypt, for those who are not familiar with African. And it's bordered by 7 neighboring countries, including South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Egypt, and Libya, and Chad. The office, the Carter Center office in Sudan, where I am head of the peace program, focus on youth. And the question is, why youth? Sudan population, 60% of its population are young people. And there is a distinction between the youth aspiration and the old generation aspiration. I could call intergeneration tension. So when the revolution took place 2018, which toppled down the former military regime, Omar al-Bashir Carter Center decided to support the Sudan people to work throughout the transition successfully. So the discussion at the beginning of the program, what will be the focus of our program? And we didn't actually spend some time before we figured out youth. So our program is focused on youth because the youth in Sudan are the one who actually championed the revolution since 2018. And because of some difficulties of a successful transition up to the moment we are speaking, the youth are the one who are still championing the demonstration, demanding full civilian rule and peaceful country for themselves. What is different between the youth and the other generation is that they are able to cut across the political, ethnic, religious, and whatever you may call it, divides. In Sudan, which is ridden with conflicts because of the division along religion, and that's why you have some political parties who have tension along the religion side. You have some social groups and ethnic division, but the youth have actually crossed all this, and they have united to have a new Sudan that actually respects diversity management. And because of that, we found if we want to, Carter Center, if we want to support Sudan transition, I think it will be okay to work with the youth. And now we are working with youth in Sudan across the country, all over the country. We are not talking about sample of youth. We are talking about the whole youth in the country. So our program is focused primarily to make the voice of the youth heard and to give them a command on the future of their own country. Since they are championing the fighting for dictatorship and replacement with a peaceful, stable, and democratic government. Our work with the youth nationwide is based on the fact that youth have their own organizations. We call them youth-based organizations. Some of them are formally registered, some of them are informal. We have already had a kind of national mapping, and now we are actually working with more than 7,300 youth-based organizations in the country. They have one agenda. They have different, a lot of differences and variation, but they have one common agenda, that they want to see their country democratic country. This is the one thing that unifies them. And therefore, we are working with them across the country to mobilize them, to provide them with a platform that actually allows them to network and to connect and to discuss with each other and actually unify and consolidate their views and make their voices heard from bottom up to the national government, but also to have a kind of channeling that they can also have a channel from the government up down to the grassroots. At the moment, the network is not yet well functioning, but we are now in the middle, and I will just give you an example. If, for example, I want to send now a photo of this event, we have like 19 focal points. Each focal point represents like a state, like the United States of America has several states. So we have 18 states, and we have 21 focal points. I just need to get into the WhatsApp group, put my picture there, describe the event. In 5 minutes, it will be spread to the whole youth network across the country. So and so you can now look about the other issues and so forth. One of the current situation in Sudan, for those who are following the politics of the country, we have now what we call political deadlock. Since the last October, we had a military come back to the rule, where our prime minister has been, the civilian prime minister has been ousted, and since then the youth took to the street and the continued demonstration on daily basis, monthly basis, weekly basis to the present. And because of that, there is no prime minister, and therefore there's no government. The proposal to unlock the deadlock has been provided by several political parties. The only viable one is the one actually presented by youth. So actually, and we are actually trying to make their proposal being put on the table by international community so that it can actually carry the country straight forward. I will just stop there, but I'm happy to see some questions.
Wow. Yeah. I have a quick, what's the population of Sudan?
It's 45 million, and 60% of them are youth, actually.
Okay. So, given that we are on the cusp of celebrating Jimmy Carter's birthday, I kind of surprised the group here and said I wanted to hear from them any personal stories that they have, either of their interactions with our former president, and also any stories they have about how Jimmy Carter and the center has touched the work that they've done. And this time I'm going to start with you, Guma.
Thank you. I think this is, I don't know the rest of the question, but I think this is one of the most touching questions. I was here in 2017. By then I was not employed by Carter Center, but I was a consultant by Carter Center. So I was invited by then in 2017 to spend some time here. And during that, I was very lucky to meet President Carter and Rosalynn Carter in this center. And since then, I do have a personal touch with him. But the story I would like to give in very brief, in Sudan, President Carter is known to be a president who actually had a direct impact on the Sudanese people in a number of ways. One of the direct ways that in 1995, in the middle of the civil war between South and the North, and most of the disease were spreading in the conflict areas, including South Sudan, including the guinea worm disease. And the health workers were not able to access the areas because of the war, which continued for several years. And President Carter actually intervened and convinced by then the dictator Omar al-Bashir and the late Dr. John Garang, who was actually leading the military, the armed movement against the central government. He convened them in that mid of war to stop the war and give a chance for the health worker to intervene. And that happened actually. The two accepted to give a special ceasefire for 3 months. And because of that, the Carter Center, through the health program, were able to intervene in the whole South Sudan and eradicate the guinea worm at that time. And this is one of the great work he have done at that time. When the 3 months finished, the health worker report was that they have not finished and they need more time. He again put another proposal on the table, and another ceasefire agreement was given for 3 months, and by that they finished the eradication of the guinea worm in South Sudan. Not only that, but that intervention through health became a basis for the two parties to engage later in political process or negotiation that actually eventually led to the signing of the peace agreement in 2005. And I would say, as a professor, I could see that the work of the Carter Center, which we call it Peace Health Nexus, I think is now creating a theory in conflict resolution. Because through health, you could actually lead the conflict party to go into a kind of negotiation through health service. I will stop there.
Wow. I mean, any idea how many lives have been saved because of Jimmy Carter's involvement and the Carter Center's involvement in Sudan?
I have no figure, but I will not count them as thousands, but I will put them in number of millions.
Wow. That's,
Yeah.
Whew. Okay, Rachel, no, you were here for many, many years, so I'd love to hear your stories.
So I guess similarly, and I mentioned this before in the context of Zambia, the role that the Carter Center with partners, the National Democratic Institute, played in Zambia in 1991 was pivotal in terms of introducing multi-party democracy. And as I mentioned, there were several elections, and there were changes in power, which in some ways is unique, unfortunately. But now in 2021, they still had a good democratic election. And so that kind of initial work and engagement and continuing to go and engage and support, I think, had a real lasting impact there. I will share another story that was personally quite impactful for me, related to work I did before when I was at here in Atlanta on East Timor, Timor-Leste. And the center did a lot of work to observe what was called a public consultation for independence there. And we had observers on the ground, and it was one of the first observations where we really integrated some of the human rights programming also into the election observation work. And it was hard, and most of the folks voted for independence, but there was a large number of people that weren't in supportive. And if any of you are familiar with that, the reaction was swift, and it was bad, and our office staff had to evacuate. We had to evacuate, and a lot of the militias did a lot of devastating things to the country, and really, burned down actually large portions of the country. And we, came. What can we do? How can we continue and stay engaged and stay involved? So I went back on an assessment, and the situation was so bad, there were no hotels. The UN had parked some boats out on the water, and that's where we stayed, and would go in and see buildings completely devastated, destroyed, no desks, no chairs, nothing in the schoolhouses, etc. And there was a note when I got back to the boat, and it was someone that was asking to meet with me, and I was like, okay, what is this about? But I said, well, I should do this, and so I go. And it was a young man, and he said, I had learned you had come back, and I just wanted to personally thank you. I was like, well, thank you, that's very nice. He said, you won't remember me probably, but I was on a U.S. visit, and we came through the Carter Center, and I met with you and your colleagues in the Zabin room, and we talked to you about East Timor and how we wanted independence and we wanted a democracy. And he said, and then you guys came back and you observed what was happening, you reported on what was happening, and this is hard. This isn't easy for any of us where we are right now, but we believe we're going in the right direction. And I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank President Carter. I wanted to thank the staff for being here and doing this. And it's personally fulfilling. There's pain in it, to be sure, but Timor's a country, and they the folks now have that, and they have that democracy, and it's impactful, and to hear from just someone there how important it was to them, I think really, for me, kind of defines what the center does. And it's that very much a caring about the people, and really trying to help support and create a better circumstance.
And while you were working here, did you ever have any interactions with Jimmy Carter? I mean, before the program, all three of them said they had several times where they have been able to shake the hands of Jimmy Carter, which seemed to be, and I know since you had been here, any kind of one-on-one interactions with the former president?
Yes, and I think in some ways it demonstrates what is at the root of how the things are done, because it's based very much on President and Mrs. Carter's vision and passion and how they do things. He would come through the office and walk through and say, hey, and how are you doing? And one day he walked into my office and he said, hey, how's it going? And I said, it's going well. And I kind of want to talk to him about something really, intense. And he sees my son's pictures, of course, on the wall. And he said, how are your boys? And I said, oh, they're amazing, and he gives me a chance to tell a couple of stories about them. And I said, I'm just so proud of them. And he said, we know, and we're proud too. And, as a working mother, trying to balance doing something that is important to you and something that actually does take you away from your family, that kind of acknowledgement and that kind of support from the very top was quite important for me.
Did you get him aside? Yeah, isn't that a great story? Whatever that important issue was, did you feel like there was an opening there to bring it up?
I think I said something to him, and he was like, okay, a memo, Rachel, or something. He's like, summarize it, please. And I was like, okay. But, yeah, it was, and, and people speak about getting his feedback on your memos. Yes.
You make it sound like it's not all positive, but
well, he wants the best.
okay. Sounds
And he will make you deliver it.
okay. And Mulat, tell us about your interactions or your experiences that you've had with the former president, and obviously Rosalynn as well, if you have any stories that you can share.
Okay, thank you. I have to relate it to the community, the interaction with the president and Ms. Rosalynn Carter. And I should take to the community how the interaction looks like, and then I will come back to myself. By the way, the program in Ethiopia, mainly in Amhara region, is very well known, be it in the government side or in the community. Government considers the Carter Center as a trusted, long-standing, and real supporter of the program. And if there is anything that needs a real support, so questions come to our office, be it logistics or whatever. Like, for example, in the era of COVID, our drivers were assigned in a hotel. They didn't go home, and they were serving 24 hours by just working with government and transporting people who used to detect cases and transport to the site where cases are isolated. So especially this serious era has imprinted the service of the Carter Center in the government's mind. Another thing, when we come to the main program, now if you happen to visit a community, a very remote community in Amhara region, because we are distributing Zithromax, which is Pfizer produced in the ITI.
To combat trachoma.
Yeah, to combat trachoma, this is the active trachoma treatment. That's what we call Zithromax. So when you go to the community and ask about treatment, there are different types of campaigns run currently and starting from some years back. So people, did you take this drug? Which one? They ask. The drug this type, the Carter drug, that's what they say. So this is the community in the village. So to that extent, the influence of the program has gone deep in the village, in the household and the individuals. The other impressive work and that brought the influence of President and Rosalynn Carter, or the whole the Carter Center program to the community, is water construction. For your information, the Carter Center for a decade didn't enter agreement for water construction because it is resource intensive. So in the current 5-year project period, there was long dialogue with government, and finally Carter Center allocated, just changing the stand it has before, allocated 61 million Ethiopian birr, which could be something like that time $2 million. And this was solely assigned for school water construction. For your information, the region where I am living, or the Carter Center is supporting, has nearly 9,000 primary schools. And in 2016, we did survey, only 20% of the schools had water. Currently, it's about 50% that the schools that have water. So 500 or 1,000 students are passing the day without water. So the Carter Center support was not simply support, because there are supports that may not be properly implemented, but this is a serious issue for us. We piloted and it was successful, and then we scale up and it's successful still. So community, government are trusting the Carter Center for programs it is implementing. So the name, the service is very much respected and known in the community. To come to me in 2005 when I was visiting the region, it was me who was coordinating the program, and by chance, maybe many Ethiopians couldn't have this chance, I was the one who welcomed him, and I had the chance to shake his hands. I was, of course, I remember my small hand and his big palm, so it is printed in my brain to date. So I remember that one. Thank you.
Well, I think all three of those stories are great testaments to know how valuable what your donations do for the community and all that. I know we've got just a little bit of time. I wanted to just kind of throw this out and have y'all talk what are some of the biggest challenges that you face, and how do you stay motivated in trying to keep the work done? And who would like to go first on this one? Okay.
I will go. I will just also give a real testimony. When we started to make consultation, nationwide consultation with youth in order to understand their priorities, their concern, and their challenge, which will be the basis for designing the project, I was actually leading a mission to Greater Darfur. And we met with all representative of youth-based organization in Darfur in a big hall, like 500, I can't remember the number, who represent the different communities and different organizations and ethnic group. And after explaining the project and everything, then we open up for discussion. And one of the young people stood up there and say, it's good that you are here as a team leader, but you are also the head of the office. I say, yes. And then he said, okay, we have an experiences here where organizations, international organizations came, and they are present with us, but when things get very difficult and harsh, they disappear. I say, oh, that's it. And then they say, okay, you said you are here because the Carter Center wanted to work with youth throughout the transition. I say yes. And he said, are you willing to work with us even when things get difficult? Quit. I say, we are willing to work with you. 10 days later, the coup happened. And most of the organization ceased to exist. The first day of the coup, that conversation came to my mind. And also, I could remember also how courageous the founder of this organization was selecting difficult tasks, waging peace instead of waging war, building hope, fighting disease. These are not easy choices. You can't go for this kind of choices without courageous. And then I had some consultation with my leadership here, and I told them, look, we have to come out and make our voice about this. And we actually put on a first press release ever, naming the coup, when others were still discussing what is it. And that actually has given us credibility, very big credibility, that we are here to work with the people of Sudan in the transition, in good and in bad. And I could say that these are some of the very, very strong moments in the history of our working with youth in Sudan. And in fact, the youth will remember that when they were looking to see the international community supporting and condemning, supporting the democratic transition and supporting the youth, they only found that very few were actually working with that. And so that is one of the things that remain in my memory. But we didn't regret that, despite the insecurity and the risk that was involved. But today I can say that the confidence and the trust that is now on for the Carter Center work in Sudan among the youth is basically because of that position we have taken in the right time and in the right place.
That's great. Who wants to go?
Well, okay. Thank you, Maria. Let me say something in this regard. Since our program is held, so the challenge faced in the way out, I think I better say it in terms of health. So, like for example, in our program, as I mentioned earlier, we do have two basic treatment sides. Actually, we are implementing what we call safe strategy, meaning surgery, antibiotics, facial cleanliness, and environmental improvement. This is WHO set strategy. So I am talking about the treatment side, surgery and antibiotics. The F&E is really a complicated one. So when started implementing the treatment side, I mean the medical treatment, I mean the mass treatment side, we had a problem. Just one district takes a month. So we do have many districts, over 100 districts. So if we go district by district, it was not possible to do other work. And even it was not possible to complete in a year. So we sat down and looked for a way out. So we tried to map from other countries. There was no any experience. So what we did, just it was a malaria and trachoma project period. So we just agreed to draft one document, and that is just to run this treatment within a week in a sub. We divided the region into two. There are five zones in the two sub-regions, and then one at a time and the other at a time. Each zone has, I mean, each sub-region has 80 and 50 over districts. So we plan to run it within a week time. So we developed a document, and it needs training document, logistics arrangement, budget allocation, and all these necessary components were to be sought when developed the document. Finally, in 2008, we managed to run the first mass drug treatment campaign, what we call Maltra, malaria, and trachoma, in a week time. So within that week time, what we were doing, we make ready all rapid tests, materials for malaria, and drug, full drug for the trachoma treatment. And all were available. Then what happened, we did this, the campaign, and within a week time, we were able to address 80,000 tests for malaria, of which nearly 40,000 were positive. And this impressed the government and decreased the spread of the disease. After a week, there was a dramatic decrease from malaria transmission. It was an epidemic and really consuming time of government by just running here and there just to address the epidemics. So finally, it continued and still prevailing as a solution, this mass drug treatment within a week time. So it gave us time for others, and the program has benefited from this. And the other program is the surgery side. The surgery in the beginning, we had no problem because there were many cases coming to the campaign site. If I tell you one example, I myself was running the campaign as a surgeon, as a coordinator, and we operated on 700 cases in a week. And almost the same number of cases we returned because we finished our consumable. But as the time went on, the scarcity of cases confronted us. We know the prevalence in the survey is high, but the flow of cases decreased to the campaign and the static service. So we designed way out. And one of the way out was fast track initiative. This was, of course, Ministry of Health supported and driven program. And with that, the first zone piloted in our region managed to operate over 80,000 within 2-3 years time because of this strategy. And then other zones followed this approach and they managed to do a reasonable number of surgeries. But later on, this one failed also. So we sat down, we think of way out. And then we planned focused TT surgery, and that focused TT surgery still focuses in districts where prevalence or backlog is high. And still it just helped us for some time, but it couldn't take us long. So currently, what you call house-to-house case finding is existing. This house-to-house case finding, it has got a document. We train community volunteers, and they go house to house. They divide the village, 200 or 300 households, and then they go each house, mark on the door, TT, yes, trachomatosis trichiasis, yes, no. If there is sign of no, then there is no case there. If there is yes, then the health extension worker has to search and get these people for service. So this is now what is properly working and what we are using. So as you can understand, there is a problem, big problem, and there is a challenge to address the problem. And we are still continuing thinking of way outs. And that has also served us. Thank you.
And Rachel.
So the work that we're doing, trying to support women and youth participation, there's a lot of barriers to that. And similarly, youth is the largest population, and women, right? But they're not equally present in Parliament, at the councillor level, in government, on local, community member leadership groups. And so one of the things we're doing with our partners is trying to, our national level partners, and I didn't mention that similarly we're working with what are called community-based organizations that are active at a more local level. So we're trying to help support our partners working more effectively with CBOs as well. And so one of the things that one of the partners did was really try to engage with traditional chiefs, because they play a really important role in influencing how the community may step up to support a woman or a young person. And through the Carter Center support, they did a lot of work with Chief Manze. He's in Southern Province, and he embraced being a champion, and not only came to Lusaka and did what's called a national ndaba to speak about why it's important for traditional chiefs and other leaders to support women and youth, but called on women and youth to push their local leaders, including the traditional chiefs, to really be advocates and champions. And he even agreed to have his image on a billboard when you ride into Manze and when you ride out, and it says, "I support women and youth, do you?" And most recently, and it's become a strong collaboration between our partners, and they want to move that work into other provinces. Most recently, he convened 11 other traditional chiefs from the whole province and really called on them, and they're stepping up to be an advocate for women and youth. And I think it's a challenge, but there's a success and a solution, and in a way that may actually have some real impact and lead to some real change, because you're talking about behavior change, right, which is so hard. So that's a challenge and a success. I think Soya had wanted us also to maybe give you a little sense of some of the practical challenges that we might face, which is, what happens when the power goes out, and that happens, and you have to figure out a way around it. And also for a lot of the work where we go very far into remote areas, because we're very much wanting to hear from everyone, the folks in the rural, peri-urban, as well as the urban areas, you really have to be prepared and make sure you've thought through everything you might need. And often, traveling for anywhere from 7 to 9 hours on often untarmacked roads. But those are so minor when it comes down to it, but it's part of what you have to think about and what you have to be prepared to kind of deal with and address on a daily basis.
I have so many. If you have any questions that you would like to either direct to one of them or in general, is that the mic where they would go? There are mics on either side. So who's going to be our first brave member of the audience to ask a question? Okay, I'm going to throw in another question here for now, but I'm going to come back to you after this question, and let's see if we can keep our answers a bit shorter, because I'd love to make sure that you'll have an opportunity to answer questions from the audience. One thing that surprised me when we talked was something that you said: Africa is way ahead of the United States and the developing world when it comes to climate change. Can you just, tell me what Ethiopia is doing to help combat climate change, and I'll ask what Zambia and what Sudan is doing.
This is a very interesting question. Actually, if any of you happen to be in Ethiopia, the environment is getting degrade from time to time. And you see many bare mountains and valleys because of continuous use for farming. So the current Prime Minister declared a green legacy in the country and used to plant billions.
And trees.
Yeah, trees. Yeah, tree plants. So every year, our heavy rainy season starts from mid-June and mainly from July. So every year, I think some forest before started, and the first was 4 billion trees were planted, and the next 5 billion were planted, and the next 7 billion were planted, and now totally we have reached over 20 billion plants planted in the country. Wow. So the challenge, planting is okay, it has happened very really dramatically, and even in a daytime, hundreds of millions of plants were planted in a region, not in a country. So people were very much motivated and followed this legacy, and there were many youngs motivated and started planting and selling or availing the seed with low cost, and job opportunity also created for the young. So this has continued. I am not sure if 100% or 85% are survived. This is a question for all. Otherwise, the planting campaign has successfully done, and I am eyewitness. There are areas now visibly covered with the newly planted trees. So
We
this
could
is
definitely
a
learn
very
a lot from that here.
So I think other countries need to learn from this, be it Africa or and even our country should continue sustain this legacy, and others can learn. This is how we sustain or prevent the problem from weather change. Thank you.
Isn't that great?
So
Rachel?
we're actually piloting a climate change program in Zambia for the center. And one of the we've been going into 4 rural areas to talk with women and youth and other community members about their understanding and the impact of climate change. And we've been really interested to see how aware they are, even in these very rural areas, about climate change and what the impact it's having in their communities. And then at a national level, the government has created a ministry that deals with climate change, has a national climate change policy, and also has a policy to think about how to incorporate curriculum around climate into the schools. So I think there you can see it in a priority way.
Yeah, isn't that good?
I mean, why the developing countries, especially Africa, are more sensitive to climate change is for practical reason. Because I'm from the rural area, I'm from the village, I'm a boy who was grown. The reason is very clear, because the climate change and environmental degradation affect directly the livelihood of the people. Their very survival. It's not like when you later on read in the news and in BBC or CNN about the climate, or when you are attacked by hurricanes, and then some scientists will make a long explanation about how you reach at this point, and then you started to figure it out. No, in Africa it's direct. It's direct that you could find yourself this year, your harvest is almost zero, and that's because of climate change. So that actually imposes that the responses of the local community has also to be direct. That's why you find that in the rural areas, people are very responsive to climatic change by adopting new strategy that will allow them to survive. And because in order to survive, they have to deal with like a better way of managing water, a better way of managing the scarcity forest and vegetation cover, and that is something that actually restore the environment gradually for their own benefit in terms of livelihood. In Sudan, like other African countries, there's a lot of international funded kind of projects that actually encourage the climatic resilience in a number of ways. And therefore, I could see that the climate change impact is very direct to the livelihood of the people in the developing countries, and therefore people are more ready to respond. In the advanced countries, where they're dependent on the direct nature in terms of farmers or animal husbandry is not direct, and therefore the responses seem to be slow. But the fact is that this is one of the issues which actually necessitate or require international collaboration, because even the behavior of the advanced society will also impact it on the developed countries, and the opposite is true. So I think I could say that the advance or the awareness of the developing societies is higher, but the reason is clear, because their survival, their very direct survival, is actually depending on the environment and natural resources indirect. And therefore the climatic change means a direct threat to their lives.
Well, I think Hurricane Ian is, we also have some direct impact, but we maybe have not made the connections like we should. Okay, who's my brave soul who wants to ask a question? Okay, if you can come up to the mic. And can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is George Hartz from Arizona. We do a fair amount of work in Kenya for some programs we're involved with. And one of the things we've noticed there is the heavy influence of tribalism. And I'm thinking particularly about your youth programs in Sudan. My observation is most youth social interaction takes place in their local tribal language, even though they probably know Kiswahili and English as well. When almost all your social interaction is in your tribal language, it reinforces tribalism, obviously, and makes it harder to interact with other people within your country. How do you address this issue of tribal language in making people feel they can work together in Sudan?
I think that's a good question. The younger population now in Sudan are the percentage of the rate of education is relatively higher, and therefore there is a common language of communication. In Sudan, we have now what you can call youth movements. This youth movement is a nationwide movement, and it has network, and I used to say this persistently. In Sudan, we don't have any political party or any social movement or any other organization that is actually grounded in the grassroots all over the country except youth movements. And because of that, the connection and the network which we are actually promoting, we are not actually inventing wheels. We already found the youth have a kind of nationwide thinking that different languages, different culture, different religion is supposed to enrich their own society, not to be a source of division. And they are advancing this. They are actually teaching us that we don't see that talking my own language is a source of division with my colleague in the other. Instead, my colleague is supposed to respect this, cherish it, and try to promote the culture. And because of that, we are actually advancing this kind of attitude and making them to cherish each other, to respect each other by their own differences, but yet within a unity. So we call it unity in diversity. And I think the youth are actually capturing this, and this is the only way that Sudan can actually have a peaceful society. Because without respecting each other in terms of your local language, your culture, your religion, without having this kind of respect of each other, this kind of conflict based on religion, on culture, on language identities will continue actually to be a source of conflict. I think the youth have actually surpassed this stage. That's why we wanted actually to support them so that they can actually, we can produce new leadership for the country who can actually deliver services across the country without, irrespective to their religion or culture or local language. More than that, that the federal system which the youth are actually calling for, it means that actually you could actually have your local language in your local school or local university, and then there is some other common national issues that bring you together, but yet they respect your own uniqueness within that. And I think this is one of the source of the strengths. I am seeing it in the youth, and this is the only way that Sudan can actually maintain itself. We have already, the youth have already said that publicly, that we have learned the lesson. The separation of South Sudan was exactly because of that. Because of the South Sudanese have their own language, they have their own culture, they have their own religion, and they didn't see themselves in the national menu. And that's why they opted to go away. If we want to, the youth are saying that if we want to maintain the integrity of the country, we ought to actually integrate all this diversity and manage it in a meaningful way.
We have reached the end of our time, but I wanted to just share with you a couple of takeaways that I thought that really resonated with me. One thing that I heard is that the Carter Center is helping really strengthen democracy in all of these countries. And by really focusing and trying to build from the ground up. Another thing that really touched me was, I think, what you said, the nexus of peace and health.
Yes.
And when we talked earlier, Mulat talked about he stays out of politics. He's all into delivering health. But we all know that sometimes it's difficult to help solve your health issues when there's a backdrop of political conflict. And I asked Guma, how do you stay grounded and not feel overwhelmed by the challenges? And can you share what you said? You said,
I mean,
you said there's no turning back.
Yeah, there's no turning back. I mean, I shared this with my group in Peace Program. I'm inspired also by the founder of this organization. I will repeat it. The themes of the organization does not give you an option. It's a one-way traffic. I mean, there's no way you could start, and then in the middle there you start thinking backwards. There's no way. We are working you are actually choosing an area which is very sensitive, which is very difficult, and once you embark on it, you have to move.
You have to go forward.
You have to go forward. So it has no this backward, yes. Like when we started working with youth, for those who anti-democratic transitions, they are already your enemy. So if you step back, you are actually achieving their own goal. And that's why you have to continue moving. And I think this is one thing that the expansion of the program with the new ground we are taking is another push that will allow us to move forward rather than actually feeling like we are tired or that things are so difficult there's no way you can actually sit down and say it's too much. We have to move forward.
Another theme that I heard, that the Carter Center is very respected in the countries where it operates. And because of that, they ask, which is the Carter drug? And that's the one that they want. When you reach challenges, obstacles, I think you said this, Mulat, said, you have to continue to think of another way out to make it work. Cherish each other, which I think is very much part of the Carter Center mantra, and that there's unity in diversity. And I have to say, 20 billion trees planted in Ethiopia gives me hope. Thank you all for listening, and let's thank our panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
You very much for sharing that. I just have a couple of housekeeping things that I need to share with you all. If you are riding on a bus to get to the hotel, will be two buses out front. One is going to the Emory Conference Center and one is going to the